Hello there, YouTube. Last time my stupid webcam cut out on me, which you may or may not have been able to tell. But, as you can imagine, I hilariously kept reading for another 30 minutes or so. Still, I'm not about to give up on this dang chapter yet. There may be tons more pages. Tons more, but I will read them all to you, YouTube. And you will either enjoy it, or you won't watch this video or the next one. It's really up to you. I don't care, honestly. But it's wholly your decision. So, let me scoot a little closer to the camera for volume and clarity. There you go. You can see my ugly face in more detail. How wonderful for you. Don't you feel lucky? Let's pull you a little closer. Alright, enough to do. Back to the text. In Lee versus Wiseman, 1992, a case involving prayer at a public school graduation, Justice Anthony Kennedy originally sided with the four justices who said that prayer was permissible. While writing the 5-4 majority opinion, Kennedy found that he could not make a persuasive argument for allowing it. He switched sides, I'm chewing on a lozenge if you can't notice, resulting in a 5-4 majority the other way. Kennedy's switch was dramatic in its effect, but strategic considerations are always a component of the working of the court. Justices have been known, for example, to vote with a majority even when disagreeing with it in order to have a say in the draft opinion that circulates during preparation of the final vote. Other federal courts. The Supreme Court's position at the top of the judicial system gives it unrivaled importance. Nevertheless, the Supreme Court is not the only court that matters. Judge Jerome Frank once wrote of the upper court myth, which is the view that the lower courts dutifully follow the rulings handed down by the courts above them. The reality is different, as the following discussion explains. U.S. District. Annoying, huh? U.S. District Courts. The lowest federal courts are the district courts. There are 94 federal district courts altogether, at least one in every state, and as many as 4 in some states. Each district includes several judges, who number roughly 700 in all. The federal district courts are chief trial courts of the federal system. Virtually all criminal and civil cases arising under federal law are argued first in the district courts. They are the only courts in the federal justice system where in the federal system overall, pardon me, where the two sides present their case to a jury for a verdict. Cases at this level are usually presided over by a single judge. Lower federal courts rely on and follow Supreme Court decisions in their own rulings. The Supreme Court reiterated this requirement in the 1982 case, Hutto v. Davis. Unless we wish anarchy to prevail within the federal judicial system, and this precedent of the court must be followed by the lower federal courts, no matter how misguided the judges of those courts may think it to be. However, the idea that lower courts are rigidly bound to Supreme Court rulings is part of the upper court myth. District court judges might misunderstand the Supreme Court's position and deviate from it for that reason. In addition, the facts of a case before a district court are seldom identical to the case settled by the Supreme Court. The lower court judge must decide whether a different legal judgment is appropriate. Finally, ambiguities or unaddressed issues in Supreme Court rulings give lower courts some flexibility in deciding cases. Another indication of the significant role of district court judges is that most federal cases end with a district court's decision. Typically, the losing party decides not to appeal the decision to a higher court. U.S. Court of Appeals. Cases appealed from district courts go to federal courts of appeals, which are the second level of the federal court system. Courts of appeals do not use juries. Ordinarily, no new evidence is submitted in an appealed case. Rather, appellate courts base their decision on a review of the lower court's methods. Appellate court judges act as supervisors in the legal system, reviewing trial court decisions and correcting what they consider to be legal errors. Facts that this is circumstances of a case found by district courts are ordinarily presumed to be correct. The United States has 13 courts of appeals. 11 of them have jurisdiction over a circuit comprised of the district courts in anywhere from 3 to 9 states. See figure 14-3. I forgot you can't. So be. Of the remaining two, one has jurisdiction over appeals arising in the District of Columbia, and the other, the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit, has jurisdiction over appeals involving patents and international trades, regardless of the circuit in which they arise. Between 4 and 26 judges sit on each court of appeals, but each case usually is heard by a panel of 3 judges. On rare occasion, all judges of a court of appeals sit as a body, en banc, in order to resolve difficult controversies, typically ones that have resulted in conflicting decisions within the same circuit. Each circuit is monitored by a Supreme Court justice who typically takes the lead in reviewing appeals originated in that circuit. Conflicts or inconsistency in how the different circuits are applying a law can lead the Supreme Court to review such cases. Courts of appeals offer the only real hope of reversal for many appellants because the Supreme Court hears so few cases. The Supreme Court reviews less than 1% of the cases heard by federal appeals courts. Special U.S. courts. It's a good Sean Connery, right? It's really bad Sean Connery, if you ask me. Let's try it for the next one. In this... No, we're not going to understand that, are we? Not at all. How about this one? In addition to the Supreme Court, the Court of Appeals, and the District Courts, the federal judiciary include a few specialty courts. Among them are the U.S. Claims Court, which hears cases in which the U.S. government is being sued for damages, the U.S. Court of International Trade, which handles cases involving appeals of U.S. Custom Office rulings, and the U.S. Court of Military Appeals, which hears appeals of military court-martials. Some federal agencies and commissions also have judicial powers. For example, the issuing of fines and their decisions can be appealed to a federal court of appeals. The state courts. The American states are separate governments within the U.S. political system. The 10th Amendment protects each state in its sovereignty, and each state has its own court system. Like the federal courts, state court systems have trial courts at the bottom level and appellate courts at the top. Each state decides for itself the structure of its courts and the method of selecting judges. In some states, the government appoints judges, but in most states, judges are elected to office. The most common form involves competitive elections of either a partisan or a non-partisan nature. Other states use a mixed system called the Merit Plan, also called the Missouri Plan, because Missouri was the first state to use it, under which the governor appoints a judge from a short list of acceptable candidates provided by a judicial selection commission. The list of acceptable candidates provided by a judicial selection commission, already read that. The selected judge must then be reviewed periodically by the voters, who, rather than choosing between the judge and an opponent, simply decide by a yes or a no vote whether the judge should be allowed to stay in office. See how the 50 states differ. Besides the upper court myth, there exists a federal court myth, which holds that the federal judiciary is the most significant part of the judicial system, and that state courts play a subordinate role. This view is also inaccurate. More than 95% of the nation's legal cases are decided by state or local courts. Most cases arising under criminal law, from shoplifting to murder, and most cases arising under civil law, such as divorces and business disputes, are defined by state laws or by local ordinances, which are derived from state laws. Moreover, nearly all cases that originate in the state or local courts also end there. The federal courts do not come into the picture because the case does not involve a federal issue. The losing party in a divorce suit, for example, cannot appeal a decision to federal court because no federal law is involved. In most state criminal cases, there is also no federal issue, unless state authorities are alleged to have violated a right protected by the U.S. Constitution, such as the right of the accused to remain silent. In such instances, an individual convicted in the state court can, after exhausting the avenues of appeal in the state system, appeal to a federal court. If a federal court accepts such an appeal, it ordinarily confines itself to the federal aspects of the matter, such as whether the defendant's constitutional rights were violated. In addition, addition, the federal court accepts the facts determined by the state courts unless such findings are clearly in error. Federal courts are also disinclined when a provision of federal law does not clearly resolve a case to substitute their own interpretation of a state's law for that applied by the state court. In short, legal and factual determination of state courts can bind the federal courts, a clear contradiction of the federal court myth. However, issues traditionally within the jurisdiction of the states can become federal issues through the rulings of federal courts. In its Lawrence v. Texas decision of 2003, for example, the Supreme Court invalidated state laws that had made it illegal for consenting adults of the same sex to engage in private sexual relations. John Lawrence had been convicted under a Texas sodomy law and appealed his convictions on grounds that it violated his 14th Amendment due process rights. By grounding his appeal in federal law, Lawrence was able to have his case heard in federal court. When the Supreme Court then decided in his favor, federal law became the governing authority in such cases. Until its Lawrence decision, the courts had held states should decide whether to prohibit sexual relations among same-sex partners. How fascinating. Now here's a short one about federal court appointees. I'll read this one with perhaps a high-pitched voice. What do you think? Appointees to the Supreme Court and lower federal courts are controlled by the President, who selects the nominees, and the Senate, which confirms them. The quiet dignity of the courtroom and the lack of fanfare with which a court delivers its decisions gives the impression I'm gonna die. Let's hold that impression. It was fun of a time, though. Impression that the judiciary is as far removed from the world of politics as a government institution can possibly be. In reality, federal judges and justices bring their political views with them to the courtroom and have opportunities to promote their political beliefs through the cases they decide. Not surprisingly, the process by which federal judges are appointed is a partisan one. Supreme Court nominees! I've decided I'll just use that for titles, otherwise my voice will die. And then what would happen to America? Probably nothing. We'd be less bored. A Supreme Court appointment is a significant opportunity for a president. Most justices retain their positions for many years, enabling presidents to influence judicial policy through their appointments long after they have left office. The careers of some Supreme Court justices provide dramatic testimony to the enduring nature of judicial appointments. Water. For example, Franklin D. Roosevelt appointed William O. Douglas to the Supreme Court in 1939, and for 30 years after Roosevelt's death in 1945, Douglas remained a strong liberal influence on the court. Presidents usually appoint jurists who have a compatible political philosophy. Although Supreme Court justices are free to make their own decisions, their legal positions can usually be predicted from their background. A study by judicial scholar Robert Scagliano found that about 3 of every 4 appointees have behaved on the Supreme Court approximately as the president could have expected. Of course, the president has no guarantee that a nominee will actually do so. Justices Earl Warren and William Brennan, for example, proved to be more liberal than President Dwight D. Eisenhower had anticipated. Asked whether he had made any mistakes as a president, Eisenhower replied, "Yes, 2, and they are both sitting on the Supreme Court." Although presidents seek nominees who share their political philosophy, they also must take into account a nominee's acceptability to others. Every nominee is scrutinized closely by the legal community, interest groups, and media, must undergo an extensive background check by the FBI, and then must gain the approval of a Senate majority. Within the Senate, the key body is the Judiciary Committee, whose members have responsibility for conducting hearings on judicial nominees and recommending their reconfirmation or rejection by the full Senate. Nearly 20% of the presidential nominees to the Supreme Court have been rejected by the Senate on grounds of judicial qualifications, political views, personal ethics, or partisanship. Look at my hand, it's so distracting. Look over here. Or here. It's all reversed, it's confusing. Blah, 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 blah. Today, a nominee with a strong professional and ethics credential is less likely to be blocked for partisan reasons alone. Nominees can expect confirmation if they have a clean personal record and a strong professional record, and are able to demonstrate during Senate confirmation hearings that they have the temperament and intellect expected of a Supreme Court justice. President Bush's nomination of John Roberts in 2005. Senate hearings, to be Chief Justice in case in point. Roberts faced tough questionings during Senate hearings, but nothing startlingly new or disturbing came out, and he was confirmed by a 78-22 vote. The Senate vote in 2010 on Leila Kagan, who was nominated by